Sometimes the story of the Holocaust isn't found in a museum, it's found in the sidewalk. They're stolpersteine, or stumbling stones. There are now more than 100,000 of them. They're small brass plaques embedded in pavement across Europe. About 30 years ago, a non-Jewish German artist dreamed them up, and new ones are still being placed every year by families outside the last known address where a victim of Nazi persecution lived before their lives were torn apart. Most of the stones commemorate some of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, but there are also stones for other victims of Nazi persecution, including political dissidents, Roma people, the disabled, and members of the gay community. When Canadian children's author and Holocaust educator Kathy Kacer learned about the stones in Rome's Jewish quarter, she was intrigued. She soon discovered these can be found in dozens of countries, from Ireland to Serbia. Even some Canadian families have had them installed. Kacer's new book is called Last Known Address. It's just been published ahead of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, which begins Monday night. It's the first book about stolpersteine written for young readers, many of whom may never have heard about the Holocaust. Most provinces don't introduce Holocaust education until high school, although Ontario and now Manitoba have made it mandatory starting in grade 6. Kacer says that despite rising anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion, she believes Holocaust education still works, at least the way she does it.
Am I changing every single kid I talk to? Absolutely not. But you know what? In a room of 60 or 100 kids, if there are 5 in the room that want to read more and learn more and to have this history influence them in some positive way, I'll take the 5.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, April 13th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship news podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Kathy Kacer's parents were Holocaust survivors, and she was born in Toronto once they got here. They told her about their experiences, but Kacer only started writing about her family's story after a successful career as a psychologist. Her most famous book is The Secret of Gabby's Dresser. It's about her mother's hiding place, and it's used widely in schools. She's also written To Hope and Back, about the ill-fated journey of the MS St. Louis to Canada before the Second World War. For her newest book, Kacer chose 13 stolpersteine, many in memory of those who perished, like Anne Frank, but for some people who survived, including the late Canadian Holocaust educator Vera Schiff. And since the Stolpersteine Project honors all victims of the Nazi regime, Kacer's book spotlights a few of those non-Jewish stories, too. Kathy Kacer joins me now from Toronto to explain why she believes her stories will resonate with school children. It's an honor to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, likewise, an honor to meet you. Thank you.
It's your 33rd something book, and it's about the Stolpersteine, the Stones of Memory. The title is Last Known Address, and it came out on March the 10th, so fresh off the press.
Yes, yes.
I want to ask you how and when the idea came to you to do this story.
So this story was really a gift to me from the publisher of this book, Margie Wolf of Second Story Press. So she and a colleague of hers had been traveling in Rome for the book festival, the book fair, and they were in the Jewish quarter, and they noticed this building that had 21 stumbling stones in front of it. And Margie thought it would be a great idea to do a book about the 21 people who are honored with stumbling stones. When I started to do some research into those lives, I discovered that most of the 21 in front of this home have the same last name, Sabatello. Most were from the same family. So I thought, I would love to do a book about stumbling stones. I knew of them. I had seen them in previous years. But I thought I'm going to be writing 21 of the same story. This is one family, each individual within one family who was arrested. So I came back to Margie and said, I would love to do a book about stumbling stones, but I want to take stories from a whole bunch of countries around the world where there are stones, and really kind of take readers on this journey around the world, stopping in various cities, finding a stumbling stone, and then finding out something about the person who was honored in that way. But I will say, Ellen, every story that's included in this book is very deliberate. There are 13 stories in the book, 13 individuals, and I have a reason for including every single one of those 13, even though I could have included dozens more or different ones as we talk.
Absolutely. You open that door. Let's talk about it. Because many of us who have traveled or have actual family members or people we know who have had stolpersteine installed, I personally know two people. They went back to these cities where they had them and they did it, as a ceremony, which you talk about in your book. But I was curious. Most people think they're for Jewish only Holocaust victims. And your book is a broader look at that. Could you explain why you thought it was important to broaden out the victims?
And let's be clear, the vast majority of victims were Jews. So it is important to say that. And the majority of the stories in the book are Jewish victims. But as we know, Jews were not the only ones targeted during that time. And there are stumbling stones honoring others who were also persecuted. So there is a story of a Roma couple, the story of a disabled young man, the story of a gay man, the story of someone who was a dissident who spoke out against Adolf Hitler.
Political prisoner, yeah.
Correct. And so I thought, it is important for young readers and everyone to know that there were more than just Jews who were victims and more than just Jews who were honored. And it was important to the creator of the Stumbling Stone Project, Gunter Demnig, to honor others in addition to Jews. The vast majority of stumbling stones around the world are for Jews, but of course there are these others who've been honored as well.
What is the project, just briefly, and do you know how many there are to date since it started in 1995?
Yes, for those who may not know, stumbling stones are small brass plaques that have been laid into the pavement or the cobblestones in front of the homes where Jews and others were arrested and taken away, the last voluntary address where they lived. And these are a way of commemorating that individual. And, when I finished writing the book, I say in the book somewhere that there are 100,000, more than 100,000 stumbling stones to date in 30 countries, 700 cities. And what we know today is that we are getting closer to there being about 120,000 around the world in close to 1,000 cities. So this project continues to grow and grow. Gunter Demnig still lays the vast majority of those stones himself, although he now has a team of artists who are chiseling the stones and who are helping him in the laying of those stones. He can't do it all himself. It takes about, once you decide you want to have a stumbling stone for a relative, it can take up to 9 months to actually have it done if you want Gunter Demnig to be the one who is installing it.
You said voluntary address. I think it's very important to explain why they chose that as opposed to another place where, for example, Anne Frank was hiding in the secret annex.
Yes.
It's not there.
No. And, and one of the reasons I wanted to include Anne Frank's story in the book was I knew that young people would know her. So there was this sort of immediate identification or familiarity with that particular person. But the other thing that most people might have assumed is that the stone was in front of the secret annex where she hid. But of course, that was not a voluntary place of residence. She was forced into hiding in the secret annex. So her stone and the stones for her parents and sister are located in the square where Anne once lived and where she lived freely.
And you mentioned that it's the last place. I know that there has been, or there was in some parts of Europe, pushback to not having these stones. I want to ask you what that pushback was for. Why do people think that it's sort of undignified to have these in the road or the sidewalk?
And there's a story I included for that very reason. So the pushback was from members of the community, Jewish members of the community, who felt that it was disrespectful to walk on the stumbling stone. It was like walking on the grave of an individual. That was not Gunter Demnig's intention, of course. He saw it as a sign of respect. He wanted people who stumbled over a stumbling stone to look down, see the stone, look up, see the home where that individual once lived, pay your respect, name that person to honor them. So, but there has been pushback in that regard. And so in Munich, Germany, what they've done instead is create what they are calling memory stones. And memory stones are actually these small steel columns that rise out of the ground to about person height, with a picture of the individual being honored engraved into the memory stone. And so, as opposed to walking over the stone, you're kind of meant to look that individual in the eye and honor them in that way. So Max Freund's story, which is told from the perspective of his grandson, who was there for the unveiling of his memory stone, is for that reason. There, in Munich, memory stone, not a stumbling stone. In all honesty, I get that some people might be offended by the stone in the ground. There's another theory or a belief that one of the reasons they're in the ground is that you're actually meant to walk over it. And in walking over it, your shoe is actually polishing the stone. So you are always kind of keeping it clean, making sure it's in good condition, and paying your respect that way. That's another sort of belief that is out there. In all honesty, Ellen, memory stone, stumbling stone, whatever way we can honor those who were arrested and perished, that to me is a good thing.
You brought up some really important themes. First of all, do you have stumbling stones for anybody in your family, your parents, for example?
Yeah, I do not. Um, I've been struggling to find the homes of the last voluntary addresses of some of my people. I do have one address that, but it's in a very small village in the former Czechoslovakia. At some point, we'll see about having a stumbling stone erected there. We'll see what happens with that. Other than that, part of the problem with stumbling stones for many people is that we don't have addresses for our loved ones, our ancestors who perished in that way.
Because as you said, they're in mass graves or incinerated or wherever, we don't know. But people, I've heard, and you talk about in your book, go and use these stones as a holy place in a way, not holy in terms of consecrated ground in a Jewish cemetery, but a place where they can go and, they can talk to them, they can remember them, they can have you said a ceremony. How do you like that?
I do appreciate it, I have to say, because in cases where you do know the address of where your family member lived, but there is no grave for them, there is no place where you can go and say prayers. You may do it in your mind, but no physical place where you can go and say prayers. And so this becomes that substitute. It becomes an opportunity. It's not meant to be a grave. It's not meant to be, that. But it can be a place where you can go with family members and speak to them, pray for them, honor them in some way.
I've read recently, because of all the rise in anti-Semitism, I'm sure you've read it too, some stolpersteine are being vandalized in Europe,
Mm.
white spray paint about Palestine or against Israel.
Oh gosh, I mean, it's tragic. It's tragic. It speaks to that conflation of ideas about what may be happening in the Middle East and who Jews who were victims of the Holocaust are being treated or today, honored or not honored. I'm heart sick when I hear of the desecration of one of the stumbling stones, in the same way that I'm heart sick if I hear about the desecration of a cemetery or a home or a school or any other place. I, with everything happening in the world, I often say, and I'm sure you and others say, my parents, my grandmother are rolling in their grave to think about the situation in the world today and the rise in anti-Semitism, the kind of hatred that's going on around the world, the things that they believed would never happen again. So it sickens me. All of that sickens me. And so I think all the more important for a book like this that honors a group of these individuals that allows young people to understand a piece of history that many of them do not know, had never heard of, to connect with these stories in a personal kind of way.
Coming up, why even reaching a few students can make all the difference. Well, there's a lot of surveys that show knowledge gaps, right, in the Holocaust among Canadian young university students, for example. I'm sure you're facing this when you are out doing your thing all these years. Can you speak a little bit more broadly to what you've noticed as you bring this material to schools and adults, but mostly young people? Does it work?
Huh. Does it work? Um, well, the short answer is yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I believe in it so strongly. In Ontario, we're very lucky. Our provincial government a couple of years ago passed legislation that now makes Holocaust education mandatory beginning in grade 6. Previously, it was only mandatory beginning in grade 10. So even though, of course, kids were learning about it in different ways, mandatory in grade 6. So, you know, so important that kids at that young age are beginning to learn this history. It never surprises me, in all honesty, when I go into a school or a library and kids have limited knowledge about the Holocaust. This is ancient history for young kids. And there are so many more wars and strife that have taken the world, and that becomes overwhelming for young people as well. So, this is my mission. This is I do what I can only do what I do, and my mission to get these stories out there, to get these books into the hands of young readers, to make sure this history stays alive. That's about all I can do. And I believe so strongly that it does make a difference. I believe it in the response I get from teachers. I believe, to say this is important and my kids are moved by this history. I believe it in the response I get from kids who feel an empathy and a connection to the stories. Am I changing every single kid I talk to? Absolutely not. But you know what? In a room of 60 or 100 kids, if there are 5 in the room that want to read more and learn more and to have this history influence them in some positive way, I'll take the 5. And hopefully that 5 will translate into more and more as they go forward.
Okay. You mentioned polishing the stones, that you think that that's a beautiful thing. And I want, if you don't mind, to tell our listeners and viewers, you personally rescued or polished or saved one of the stones in your book, that story about the lost Olympic silver medalist. Can you tell me more about him and why that happened and how that happened to you?
So I was in Budapest last year with my husband, and I knew that I wanted to find a story for the book while I was there. You've been in Budapest, you know that there are tons of stumbling stones all over the city, but I needed to find a personal story. And our guide, who had taken us into the Jewish quarter and other areas, was trying to be helpful, finding me a story. And she finally told me about this Olympic fencer by the name of Attila Petschauer, who had had a stumbling stone. But we couldn't find it at first. It was a whole rigmarole to actually locate the stumbling stone in Budapest. It should have been easier, but it just wasn't. Found the location, set out to find the stone. It was a long walk on a brutally hot day across the beautiful bridge in Budapest that connects the two parts of the city up into the hillside. And lo and behold, there was the stone. And I was quite emotional when I found it. It really felt like a journey to find not only the stone, but find this person that whose history I'd been reading about already. Attila Petschauer was an Olympic fencer. He had had some immunity from arrest, a Jewish Olympic, some immunity by having special papers. He had been out for a walk one day without his papers, was arrested by the Gestapo and killed. So here was his stone, and it was in terrible condition. It was scuffed and dirty and almost you almost couldn't see it next to the pavement that it was on. So I pulled out my bottle of water and my tissues that I had, and I just started scrubbing the top of the stone, trying to clean it in some way and make it noticeable. I've since been in touch with the guide just to let her know that this is the condition of the stone. If there's anything, the stones are usually taken care of by either the individual who has had them laid or by the community in general. But this one just seemed lost. And it was on the other side of it wasn't on the Pest side of Budapest, where the Jewish quarter is and where most of the stones are. It was on the other side,
Where the castle is,
where the castle is,
and
right?
the spas. Yes, we know.
Yes, right. That's right. So I don't know if anything has been done since then to take care of it, but I felt like I had done my piece in the moment to not only honor him by finding his stone, saying his name out loud, which is what Gunter Demnig wanted everyone to do when they come across a stone, but to just take care of it for that moment, to demonstrate that this individual was being looked after. So that's the last story in the book, a very personal one for me.
I love that there's some in unexpected countries.
Serbia, London, England. you know, in Ireland, in Dublin, Ireland. Yeah, I love that as well. And again, I included the one from London because it's the only stumbling stone in the UK, which makes sense. There were no Nazis walking the streets of London. This was a young woman who had worked in London, went back to Rotterdam to be with her family, was arrested and killed there. So whereas all of the stumbling stones start with the line in whatever language is in that country, here lived, this is the only stumbling stone that says here worked. It's in front of the office where she worked when she was in London. So yes, I wanted to include that one. I wanted to include the stone in Serbia because honestly, I didn't know a lot about the involvement of Serbia in the Second World War. And it was important to understand that they're not just in the big cities, but they are in small towns and communities. The one in Dublin, Ireland was wonderful because, again, it's in front of the school where the young woman went, not in front of her home. And the young people of that school are now taking responsibility for taking care of the stone. They're the ones who clean it and look after it and have a celebration every year to honor her. So yeah, I took sort of that kind of cross section around Europe and everywhere I could possibly wander to include those stories.
Lastly, did you get to meet any of your 13 subjects' families?
So there's only one descendant other than Max Freund, who is the great grandson of the also named after him. One of the stories in the book is for a man by the name of Salman Schocken, and his daughter, Schocken Books, is now a big publisher in Israel, and she and her relatives have been running that company. So I have met her in the past. I wanted to include that story. Salman is her father is someone who managed to get out of the country, but his stone has been set recently. The other person I knew was Vera Schiff, whose story is in the book. Vera came from Prague, and I'd met Vera many times over the years. I think we'd spoken on several panels together.
Yes,
She was
she's Canadian, passed away in 2023.
correct. Such a lovely, strong, incredible woman. My family came from the former Czechoslovakia, so I really felt a desire to include a story from that country.
And what about Gunther, the Stolpersteine initiator? Does he know about your book? Did you talk to him about this?
We've not talked to him yet. Hopefully, we will send it to him, and he'll get his hands on it. He's now, oh my gosh, he must be now in his 80s. He's doing fewer and fewer of the actual installation, maybe late 70s, early 80s. So, yes, I would very much like him to have a copy.
And there's no other kids' books, are there, about stolpersteine? I think yours is it from the world. There's a lot of academic ones, big
Right.
adult university ones, but this is the only first one, isn't it?
The only one for young readers. And again, opening up a piece of history that many young kids don't know. And I will say, as I've spoken about it in adult groups, many adults don't know this about the Stolperstein either. So I feel like I'm opening up a piece of history for them as well.
It's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for being with us on the Canadian Jewish News Podcast.
Thank you, Ellen. It was really a pleasure.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Have you had a stolperstein installed for your loved ones, or have you seen some on your travels? Why not write to me at info@thecjn.ca. I wrote a story for the CJN about the stones that I saw in a small German Rhine River town in 2017, which gave the place a very dark backstory. The link to that and to Kacer's new book and more about the Stolpersteine are in the show notes. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Michael Freeman is our executive producer, and Alicia Richler is our editorial director. And the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.